The morning began with the crackling crunch of ice beneath their boots as Nathan Reyes and Julia Stanton moved deeper into the frozen wilderness of Clearwater National Forest. Snow clung to the heavy boughs above them, bending trees in long, aching arcs, and the gray sky cast a pale, muted light over the trail ahead. They had set out just after dawn, their snow-tired vehicle now parked and half-buried near a ranger access gate a few miles behind them. Radio contact was intermittent at best in this terrain. Only intermittent static had answered their last check-in, but they proceeded undeterred. Nathan knew these paths as well as anyone. He had spent 15 years climbing ridges and tracing rivers through this unforgiving region. Julia, newer to the force, had made a name for herself through precise field reporting and her quiet, relentless focus on the rules of preservation. She had once written a thesis on predator migration patterns in Idaho's northern corridor. Now she was learning firsthand how little theory meant when the land chose to remind its intruders of who truly ruled it. The forest exuded a deceptive calm, broken only by gusts of cold wind sifting snow from the higher branches. Their destination was the Thompson Creek Trail, a seldom traveled path that had recently been flagged by trappers and outfitters as the site of suspected illegal activity. Traps, according to the tip, had been placed with no registration markings, likely intended to capture bears, wolves, or lynx for the black market. With the increase in demand for claws, gallbladders, and pelts, poachers were growing bolder. Nathan had seen it before. Shredded carcasses left behind like warnings, bones stripped for resale, paw prints interrupted by sharp, rusted metal jaws. Still, nothing could have prepared him for what he and Julia found that day. As they followed the narrowing track, the trees seemed to close in around them, pressing with a quiet menace that felt almost intentional. When they reached a clearing marked by red trail tape, a sudden absence of sound fell over them. The normal rhythms of the forest, the chirps, the rustles, the faint movements of unseen creatures, had gone still. The wind paused, and even the snowflakes drifting from above seemed to hesitate. In the center of the clearing lay the remains of a large black bear, torn open with grotesque efficiency. Blood had frozen into a dark crust over the snow, the body half buried in a drift that had not quite covered the full horror of the kill. Its head lolled at an unnatural angle, eyes open, mouth slightly agape, a silent scream frozen into its face. The paws had been crudely severed, removed with hacking blows that left behind splintered bone and ragged flesh. This was not the work of an amateur hunter. It was an execution. A crime of method, not desperation. Nathan crouched beside the corpse, studying the wounds. The blade used had been large, likely serrated. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that the animal had been shot at a distance. It had likely been trapped, immobilized, and killed where it stood. A pool of frozen blood, blackened by the cold, extended in a jagged arc around the base of the body. Julia moved carefully through the scene, scanning the snow for tracks. Faint boot prints led away from the body and disappeared behind a slope where new snow had begun to cover them. She traced them as far as she could, then returned, shaking her head. Whoever had done this was long gone, or at least no longer visible. Nathan rose, brushing snow from his gloves, preparing to document the scene when something shifted in the air. It was not a sound, but a sensation, a pressure, a heaviness that settled across his shoulders like weight dropped from above. The silence fractured. A low, drawn-out growl erupted from the ridgeline to their east. It rolled through the trees like thunder, deep and ancient, vibrating through the ground and up their legs. The forest seemed to recoil, and in that instant, the illusion of safety vanished. A shape emerged from the tree line, slowly, deliberately, as if aware of its size and the terror it could conjure. Just by being seen, the grizzly was immense, at least 800 pounds, covered in a thick coat of frost-matted fur, its eyes black and glinting like volcanic glass. It moved with none of the hesitation typical of bear encounters. There was no bluff, no warning huff. It had seen the body of its own. It had smelled the blood, and something in its mind had crossed a line. The distance between them vanished in seconds. Nathan reached for his sidearm, but the snow, the cold, the shock, they slowed him. The bear collided with him like a wrecking ball, its momentum lifting him off the ground and slamming him back into a snow-covered stump. He felt the snap of bone, the tearing of muscle, the suffocating weight of the beast pinning him to the earth. Julia fired once, twice, before the grizzly spun toward her. The bullets seemed to have little effect. The massive head twisted, jaws wide, and one strike of its claw sent Julia flying. She hit the ground hard, a red arc marking the spot where its claws had torn through her face. She tried to rise, blood in her eyes, the world swaying around her. She stumbled toward the patrol vehicle, each step driven more by instinct than intent. Nathan's world was shrinking. His lungs burned, and every breath felt like it might be his last. He could hear Julia's steps fading behind him. The grizzly leaned in, its breath thick and steaming in the cold. The snow beneath him had turned red. Every nerve in his body was screaming. Somewhere behind, sirens, the faint wail of approaching rescue. But it was too late. Nathan's vision dimmed as the massive beast reared back, casting a final shadow across him. The patrol vehicle's lights reflected in the bear's eyes for the briefest moment, and then it turned, vanishing back into the trees, leaving only silence, blood, and the frozen stillness of a forest that had reclaimed its ground. The attack unfolded with such sheer violence that it shattered any illusion of control. One moment, Nathan Reyes stood amid the snowy clearing, assessing the carcass of a slaughtered bear, and the next, he was airborne, thrown like a rag doll against the unyielding trunk of a pine. The grizzly had charged with deliberate precision, not out of fear or confusion, but with purpose. Every movement calculated and brutal. Nathan's body crumpled beneath the weight of the impact, the thick padding of his tactical vest offering little protection against claws that could shear bark from trees and shatter bone in a single motion. The crunch of his ribs breaking echoed louder in his own skull than the beast's roar. Disoriented, breathless, he landed hard, snow erupting around him in a plume of red-speckled frost. Pain detonated in his chest, rolling outward in waves. His fingers twitched toward his weapon, but the nerves refused to obey. His vision blurred, white mist rising from his mouth as he fought to hold on to consciousness. Julia Stanton's training kicked in, but instinct was no match for velocity. She had scarcely pivoted, one hand reaching for the holster at her side, when the grizzly pivoted too, shifting its monstrous weight in her direction. The distance between them vanished in a blink. With a single swipe of its forelimb, claws 6 inches long carved a deep gash across her face, severing skin and muscle with terrifying ease. Her world spun. A hot spray of blood hit her collar, instantly cooling in the air. The second strike took her legs out from under her, hurling her sideways into a snowbank, where her body collapsed in a heap. Cold rushed to fill every open wound, numbing what should have been unbearable agony. The bear wasn't acting in confusion. It didn't lunge and retreat, didn't sniff or hesitate. It committed. It dominated. The forest around them remained motionless, indifferent to the violence unraveling within it. This was nature at its most unfiltered, raw, unrelenting, unapologetic. As Julia lay semi-conscious, blood pooling in her ear canal and her breath fogging in erratic bursts, she became aware of the horrible silence that followed the grizzly's movement. There were no cries for help, no shouts of retreat, only the subtle rustle of disturbed snow and the low huff of the bear's breath as it turned back toward Nathan. His form, barely visible through the swirling frost, remained unmoving. The radio clipped to his shoulder blinked with a weak red light, on but utterly useless. There was no signal in these parts, no towers, no chance of reaching anyone beyond the forest wall. Nathan remained conscious just long enough to register the taste of blood at the back of his throat. His lungs fought to inflate, each inhale met with the fire of shattered ribs grinding against his organs. One arm lay twisted beneath him, useless, while the other trembled as he tried to push himself upright. The bear stood only feet away now, a wall of muscle and fur, steam rising from its coat like smoke from a furnace. It had seen its own kind dismembered, its territory violated, and these humans had arrived in the aftermath. To the beast, they were the culprits, the killers, and punishment had already begun. Julia's limbs betrayed her as she tried to rise. Her right leg was dead weight, likely fractured by the force of her fall. Her left arm spasmed from the shock of blood loss, but her mind, hazy and trembling, clung to one objective: reach the vehicle, reach the radio. With effort that left her whimpering soundlessly, she dragged herself forward, fingertips tearing through the crust of ice. Each pull left red smears in the snow behind her, an unmistakable trail of pain and desperation. The air was bitter, biting deep into her open wounds, but she welcomed the cold. It dulled the fire spreading across her body, replaced agony with numb urgency. The patrol SUV stood less than 30 yards away, barely visible through the trees. The path to it stretched like a tunnel, longer than she remembered, more distant with every inch she covered. Behind her, the bear still loomed over Nathan's broken form, but now it moved. Slowly, warily, perhaps sensing the encroaching rumble of something foreign. Julia heard it too, faint at first, then clearer, the thin wail of sirens cutting through the wind. Relief surged and collapsed all at once. Too late, she knew it in her bones. At the edge of her strength, she reached the vehicle's side panel. Her hands, stiff and shaking from blood loss and frostbite, groped for the door handle, then the radio mic. Her voice cracked as she pressed the transmission button, forcing out the words with ragged breath. Officer down, immediate backup, hostile animal. She slumped forward, the radio slipping from her fingers, the pain finally overtaking her body's defenses. Darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, curling inward like a tidal wave, dragging her under. The last image she saw before her eyes closed was a blur of red and blue light strobing through the trees, distant, dancing, utterly powerless to undo what had already been done. When emergency responders finally arrived, boots crunching into the crimson-dappled snow, only Julia remained alive. Medics reached Nathan within seconds, but there was no pulse, no breath. His body was twisted, half submerged in blood-soaked frost, his expression locked in a final moment of terror and defiance. The bear was gone, vanished back into the trees, leaving only destruction in its wake. Tracks marked the clearing for a few yards before disappearing over a ridge, swallowed by the storm. No shots had been fired by the creature. It hadn't needed to. Its message had been clear, its dominance undisputed. The forest stood silent again as the emergency crew worked, lifting Julia's battered form onto a stretcher, covering Nathan's with a tarp. Snow began to fall once more, soft and unbothered, erasing the signs of violence beneath a new layer of silence. The only traces that lingered were the ones burned into memory, those of a force that did not reason, did not forgive, and did not yield. The mountains around Clearwater stood silent beneath a heavy blanket of snow, concealing with their stillness the horrors that had recently unfolded within their shadows. Unaware of the growing legends surrounding the region, the Brewer family arrived on February 2, 2025, seeking solitude and reconnection, far from city lights and distractions. Elliot Brewer had meticulously planned the trip for months, eager to step away from his high school classroom and immerse his family in the world of alpine nature. A passionate science teacher with a focus on environmental systems, Elliot saw this journey as more than a vacation. It was an opportunity to share the awe and fragility of wilderness with his wife Dana and their daughter Lily, a bright and curious teen whose life had recently become increasingly tethered to glowing screens and social media. For Dana, who worked in a Spokane hospital, the forest promised respite from the relentless churn of shifts and sirens. For Lily, it was a reluctant compromise. The lure of adventure mingled with the dread of no Wi-Fi. Still, the three of them arrived with optimism, hauling gear through knee-deep snowdrifts with the cheer of explorers who believed they were prepared. The family pitched their tent at a spot Elliot had chosen based on satellite maps and hiker reviews, a natural clearing beside Frostline Creek, protected on three sides by towering pines. A stream, frozen and silent, curved just beyond camp, its icy skin webbed with animal prints. Each day unfolded like a postcard, long hikes through powder-covered trails, evenings around a crackling fire, and stargazing sessions beneath a sky clearer than any Lily had ever seen. They identified tracks in the snow, fox, rabbit, elk, and made lists in a shared notebook. Elliot explained the mechanics of snowpack layers and how conifer trees adapted to high-altitude winds. Dana captured candid photos, smiling in ways she hadn't for months. Lily even began to relax, laughing more, letting herself be drawn into her father's stories about glacial formations and the invisible networks of fungi beneath their boots. But nature often withholds its true face until one lets their guard down. On the fourth night, as the sun dipped behind the icy ridgeline and the temperature plummeted into the teens, a new stillness began to settle over the campsite. The family had finished dinner, bundled tight in their insulated jackets, sipping cocoa from tin mugs while seated around the fire. Flames danced in the bitter air, flickering shadows against their tent and the trees beyond. For a moment all was peaceful, until the peace turned. At first, the disturbance was subtle, a soft crunch like a slow footstep on crusted snow. Elliot paused, thinking it might be a deer. Dana looked over her shoulder but saw nothing. The noise stopped. Then it resumed. Heavier, more deliberate, not the random movement of a foraging animal, but something pacing, circling. The torches mounted at the edges of camp revealed nothing, just darkness, swaying limbs and cold. Suddenly a shape stepped into the periphery of the firelight, massive and silent. A grizzly. Easily twice the size of anything Elliot had seen before, its fur matted and dark, its breath fogging the frigid air. It didn't charge immediately. It stood there, watching, a presence so immense it swallowed every thought in the camp. No growl, no warning bluff, just stillness, then chaos. The bear lunged forward with terrifying speed. Elliot stepped in front of his family, shouting arms wide, but it made no difference. With one brutal swipe of its forelimb, the grizzly struck him in the torso, lifting him off the ground and sending him crashing into a snowbank 6 feet away. The impact forced the wind from his lungs and split the skin beneath his coat. Dana didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lily by the arm and ran. The fire was behind them, the path ahead barely visible in the dark, but she knew that staying meant death. Snow sucked at their boots as they pushed forward, blindly, the sounds of their flight drowned by the roar of the bear and the unmistakable crack of wood splitting under weight. Branches clawed at their faces. Their breath came in sharp gasps, lungs burning, legs failing. The trees passed in a blur of darkness, their camp receding into memory. The attack had been so swift, so absolute, that neither of them could recall if Elliot had made a sound after the first blow. The only thing Dana could focus on was getting her daughter out alive. Miles passed beneath their boots in an agonizing blur. Dana had trained for emergencies at the hospital, but nothing could prepare her for this. The deep, paralyzing cold, the fear of pursuit behind them, the aching doubt that they might already be too late. Lile stumbled once, falling hard, and Dana nearly collapsed trying to lift her. But adrenaline pushed them both forward, mother and daughter stumbling through snowdrifts, leaving behind a trail of broken branches and blood-tinged boot prints. 8 miles later, a ranger outpost finally came into view. A wooden structure half buried in snow, its antenna jutting toward the sky like a beacon. Dana pounded on the door, collapsed into the arms of a stunned ranger, and tried to speak. Her words were fractured, her lips blue, her eyes swollen. But the message got through. Rescue crews mobilized within minutes. Snowmobiles tore through the forest. They reached the campsite just before sunrise, the fire long extinguished, the tent slashed open, gear scattered and broken. Blood soaked the snow near where Elliot had fallen, but there was no sign of the bear. It had vanished back into the trees, its territory reclaimed once more. They found Elliot alive, but barely. He had crawled from the impact site toward a tree, dragging himself through the snow with one arm, the other shattered at the elbow. Deep lacerations marred his chest and back, his coat shredded, his body blue with hypothermia. He had lost consciousness with one hand clenched around a small bear whistle that had never been used. The paramedics lifted him onto a sled, covered his body in foil, and rushed him to the base. He spent 3 weeks in critical care. His recovery would be long, filled with surgeries and skin grafts. But he was alive, and so were Dana and Lily. The forest, meanwhile, closed over the site once more. Snow fell heavy that night, erasing tracks and blood, returning the clearing to quiet perfection. In Spokane, local news ran a brief story. Family survives bear encounter in Idaho wilderness. It didn't mention the previous attacks. It didn't speak of the pattern forming across the region, but those who worked the forests knew the bear had returned again, and each time it struck, the encounter was more strategic, more precise, more deliberate. This was not about food. This was about dominance, territory, revenge. And it would not be the last time someone met her gaze in the torchlight, unaware that they were no longer the hunters in these woods. The warnings were not vague, nor were they lacking in urgency. Flyers had been pinned to ranger stations. Trails were marked with bright orange signs bearing bold letters: extreme danger, active bear zone. Satellite reports tracked strange thermal movement through the deeper channels of Clearwater National Forest. Rangers shared stories in hushed voices of the bear that wasn't just avoiding humans, but outsmarting them. Still, to the group of 5 men from Nevada, these were just exaggerated tales spun to ward off outsiders. They had not traveled across 2 states and spent thousands of dollars on equipment and permits to be scared off by rumors. They were trophy hunters, men who had posed beside dead moose, elk, and bighorn sheep, their kills mounted in lodges like silent declarations of dominance. Now, they were after the only thing that had eluded them for years. A grizzly. Not just any grizzly, but the so-called Ghost of Clearwater, the beast that had allegedly attacked officers, hikers, and campers. To them, it was folklore, begging to be conquered. They arrived with confidence, their gear gleaming under the late winter sun. High-powered bolt-action rifles, scoped and zeroed for long-range accuracy, were slung across broad shoulders. They carried backup sidearms, infrared scopes, and 2 small drones equipped with heat-sensing cameras. Their convoy of snowmobiles rumbled through the outer trails, slicing through snowdrifts with ease. The forest, blanketed in white and wrapped in silence, gave no immediate resistance. It let them in. Their path led them into a narrowing valley deep in the northeastern quadrant of the reserve, a place few entered even in summer. Here, towering walls of ice and stone boxed them in, creating a natural funnel that funneled winds and carried sound like a whisper between jaws. They discovered what appeared to be fresh tracks, massive paw prints, deep and deliberate, spaced with the stride of something impossibly large. Excitement surged through the group. This was it. Their kill would not only bring them prestige, it would make headlines. A successful takedown of the ghost would mean magazine covers, interviews, and perhaps even sponsorships from outdoor brands. They followed the prints eagerly, unaware that what they believed to be pursuit was in fact a lure. The grizzly had been watching them since their arrival. These woods were not her home, they were her body, and every inch of them pulsed with memory. She moved with knowledge, not instinct. She knew the ridges, the way sound carried, where the slopes offered cover, and how to vanish before a human eye could register her outline. She had seen what these men carried. She had smelled their arrogance. Unlike the prey she once chased for sustenance, these were invaders. Creatures who did not belong, whose presence brought pain and fire, and she had learned. The attack did not come in a clearing. It did not wait for a confrontation. It began on the descent of a steep, shaded embankment above the ravine where the men had paused to calibrate a drone. The sound was not a roar, but the sudden crunch of snow and rock giving way under the force of her massive body. In less than 3 seconds, she was on them. The lead hunter, a man in his 40s with a camouflage parka and orange hunter's cap, never saw her coming. She struck him with a crushing blow to the chest, sending him skidding down the incline. His ribcage collapsed beneath the impact. He was dead before he landed. Panic fractured the remaining group. One man fired, missing entirely as he stumbled backward into the snow. Another turned to run, his rifle still strapped to his back. The bear chased him down within seconds, her weight slamming into his spine, flattening him into the ice. His scream was short, muffled by the snow. The others opened fire, bullets tearing into trees and brush, echoing through the ravine like a war zone. But the bear had already vanished. She moved faster than they could track, disappearing between the boulders and snowy ridgelines like smoke dissipating into cold air. They split apart, a fatal mistake in terrain that punished isolation. One attempted to scale the embankment they had come from, only to slip and twist his ankle. Another ran west, losing his bearings in a maze of timber, his voice hoarse from screaming for help. The last managed to fire a single shot that grazed the bear's flank as she lunged a second time. It was the only thing that slowed her. The shot sent her staggering back, snarling, but it was not enough to wound her fatally. She retreated into the brush, leaving the man to collapse into the snow, weeping and shaking, his weapon now empty. By the time rescue teams reached the ravine, guided by a frantic GPS ping from the survivor's satellite beacon, 3 men were missing, and 1 was confirmed dead. Torn remnants of fabric hung from low branches. Blood patterns stretched across the ice, as if painted by something methodical. One of the snowmobiles was found overturned in a gully, its engine still faintly warm. The lone survivor, when recovered, was incoherent, with hypothermia, repeating phrases about the bear watching them, about eyes in the trees, about how it didn't fight, it waited. He described the attack not as a struggle, but a performance. It had planned each movement, and he was certain, even as he fled, that it let him go. No bodies were recovered from the missing three. Only fragments remained, shreds of a glove, a cracked scope lens, and patches of hair that had been violently torn from scalps. Search and rescue teams conducted aerial sweeps with thermal drones, but the cold obscured signatures. By the third day, snowfall returned, burying the scene under another layer of forest silence. Whatever evidence might have been gathered was lost beneath 6 inches of powder and the growing weight of collective fear. The incident was quietly buried by state officials, filed under extreme environmental conditions. The local ranger district issued a renewed closure of the Clearwater backcountry, this time indefinite. Signs now carried new language, not just warnings but absolutions. Do not enter. Area closed. No exceptions. Rumors swirled online in hunting forums and regional message boards. Some said the ghost had grown to nearly 10 feet. Others believed she had given birth to cubs and was killing to protect them. A few insisted she was no longer a bear at all, but something that had transcended instinct, that now hunted for reasons beyond survival. She left nothing behind but the suggestion of presence, scratches high on trees where no bear should reach, distant shapes caught on thermal sensors only for seconds, the sound of breathing outside tents. She had become legend not by vanishing, but by ensuring her acts were never forgotten. The forest had chosen her, and she had chosen to remember. Those who entered now did so at their own peril, stepping into a wilderness that no longer merely defended itself, but retaliated. They came with ambition, notebooks, and calibrated sensors, not weapons. 5 students from Boise State's environmental science program ventured into the Clearwater backcountry in early March, setting up camp beside Hanging Lake, where ice still clung to the edges of fallen logs and the trees stood tall, skeletal, and still. Their goal was not conquest, but data. Camera traps for tracking, soil samples for analysis, audio recorders to log nighttime disturbances. They were young, idealistic, and convinced that with enough preparation, they could safely observe one of nature's most dangerous predators. They spoke in terms of ecology, disturbance patterns, species interaction, and data modeling. But none of them understood that in the depths of Clearwater, what they were about to encounter did not fit neatly into their charts and field journals. Their camp was modest but well organized. 2 lightweight nylon tents were pitched on flattened snow near a small rise overlooking the lake. A makeshift kitchen area had been dug into the ice with a windbreak built from snow blocks. They staked motion-stickered thermal cameras facing the tree line and marked GPS coordinates for their research points. During the day, they hiked to areas where past sightings had been reported, checking for signs, claw marks, hair samples. They found little more than broken brush and some unusual prints half melted into the slush, just ambiguous enough to ignite speculation. The first night passed uneventfully. They huddled around a camp stove, voices buoyant with laughter and the glow of firelight. But as the second night fell, and the coals from their fire faded to embers, a different kind of stillness took hold. One that neither snow nor silence could explain. The cold deepened, and the air turned heavy, as if the forest itself were bracing for something. At first there were no obvious sounds, only the sudden absence of familiar ones. No wind, no cracking ice, no distant owls or rustling squirrels. The static behind the silence pressed in with weight, making their ears ring and their breath feel louder. Then came the faintest sounds. A branch snapping somewhere behind the tents, subtle but too clean to be coincidence. The steps that followed were spaced out, unhurried, like something pacing in rhythm, calculating each movement. A distant puff of air, not from wind, but from something breathing. Too large to be human, too deliberate to be random. The bear was near, but not crashing in. She was observing, stalking from just beyond the tree line, using the darkness like a blade. What occurred over the next several hours could not be described as an attack, not in the conventional sense. The bear didn't enter with force. She circled, not touching the camp, but letting her presence slip in like a draft through canvas. The students tried to dismiss the sounds as tricks of the wind or stress-induced imagination, but the fear in their throats could not be reasoned away. The tent walls rustled without wind. A camera sensor blinked erratically. A soft thud echoed near the cooking zone. They dared not move outside to check. Around 3 in the morning, the game changed. Without warning, a tent collapsed under the weight of something unseen. Screams tore through the camp, flashlights cutting frantic arcs through the darkness. Another tent shredded down the center seam, the fabric torn open like paper. Packs vanished. Equipment was flung across the clearing. They caught glimpses in flashes. A shadow brushing past a tree, a pair of eyes reflecting back the narrow beam of a headlamp. A streak of fur so dark it absorbed light. There was no charge, no roar, just chaos orchestrated in silence. They fled, stumbling blindly through knee-deep snow, boots half-laced, hands bare, leaving behind gear, food, journals, even their sleeping bags. One student tripped in the rush and vanished from sight. No scream, no movement afterward. The others turned back only briefly, calling out, but the forest had already swallowed him. Panic drove them forward, instincts shredding academic training. They did not stop until the trees opened and the terrain sloped toward a snow-covered service road. Hours passed. When they finally reached a ranger outpost 6 miles away, they were shaking, bleeding, frostbitten, and barely coherent. Search teams returned to Hanging Lake at dawn. The scene they discovered was not one of destruction, but of displacement. Everything had been disturbed but not demolished. Gear was scattered, not chewed. Food containers were missing, not ripped open. One thermal camera was found crushed under a stone. The missing student Jasper Lynn left behind no trace. No blood, no drag marks, no trail. His tent was intact except for a single tear in the rear panel. His sleeping pad was still inflated. His boots were gone. What made the event even more haunting was what wasn't found. No tracks, no prints leading in or out. The snowfall from the previous night was undisturbed. Rangers combed the area for signs, paw prints, scat, broken branches, but found nothing. The forest had erased her presence, just as it had countless times before. What they had encountered was not just a bear. It was an entity that had learned to wield fear like a scalpel. She didn't just drive them out, she unraveled them. In the following weeks, the university quietly pulled funding from the Clearwater Observation Project. The 4 survivors withdrew from school. One refused to speak of the experience at all. Another was committed for acute stress disorder after claiming she still heard the bear breathing outside her window at night. Their data was never published. The last images from their drones, 3 seconds of blurred movement near the lakeside, were archived without analysis. Clearwater remained unchanged, as if the forest had yawed and returned to sleep. Hanging Lake refroze. Pines stiffened under snow. Tourists hiked unaware past the region's edge, snapping pictures, ignorant of what had stalked the silence. But for those who had been there, the woods were no longer a subject of study. They had seen the intelligence behind the eyes in the dark. They had understood that some predators do not kill out of hunger or defense. Some simply remind you that this land is theirs, and that you were never supposed to be there. By early April, Clearwater National Forest had become more rumor than reality, closed off officially by state order, its trails abandoned, its boundaries marked by temporary fencing and hand-painted warnings left by rangers too haunted to speak in specifics. Yet the silence surrounding it only deepened the obsession of those who viewed wilderness not as a boundary, but as a proving ground. A private mountaineering team, 5 men and women from Utah, all certified in avalanche navigation and cold weather rescue, set out to cross the high ridges of Clearwater in defiance of the restrictions. Their goal was not publicity or conquest, but pure challenge. They had trained together for 2 years, traversing ice fields in Alaska, summiting volcanic spines in Chile. Compared to those, Clearwater seemed manageable. A series of ridgelines, a week-long crossing, and the promise of snowpack that would soon melt into spring runoff. They entered the range under overcast skies, their GPS watches synced, their route plotted along the western spur of Rattlesnake Ridge. The first 2 days passed without incident. They moved in tight formation, relying on established communication codes and shared responsibilities. Camps were pitched efficiently, meals rationed with discipline, their base layers kept dry and rotated. But on the 3rd day, a shift occurred not in the team, but in the air itself. Winds rose without warning. The sky, already sallow with cloud cover, collapsed into a whiteout so dense it erased horizon and depth. Snow swirled, not downward, but sideways, as if gravity itself had become uncertain. Visibility dropped to feet. GPS devices malfunctioned, spinning their compasses in meaningless loops. Radio signals disappeared into static. Trails vanished. The mountain, once a fixed map of features and markers, became an endless loop of indistinguishable whiteness. The ridgeline they thought they were following fractured into multiple directions, each identical, each a guess. Snow built up around their ankles, thighs, chests. Their breathing became labored, not from exertion, but from panic. Food packs were lost when one of them fell during a descent and their sled tumbled out of sight. Another team member cracked an ankle during that same fall, slowing their pace to a crawl. With no shelter but their tents, and no direction but the wind's shifting scream, the group continued forward, hoping to descend into a tree line that never arrived. Frostbite claimed their fingers first, numbed flesh turning white, then purple, lips cracked open from wind exposure. Hands refused to cooperate with buckles and latches. They tried to dig in, to wait it out, but the storm showed no sign of breaking. Their tent fabric froze stiff, snapping under tension. One morning, they woke to find it torn, ripped from outside, as if something had caught it in passing. No prints led to or from it, only long drag marks trailing off into the whiteness. They packed quickly, abandoning supplies. Numbed by hunger, weakened by dehydration, they moved as shadows of themselves. One by one, they dropped behind. A woman named Kelsey, who had been the strongest hiker, stopped responding to commands. Her eyes blank, she wandered off the trail in silence. They called for her, but the wind carried their voices in every direction at once. Another man collapsed from exhaustion, refusing to rise despite the team's attempts to drag him upright. The rest pressed on, their pace reduced to stumbling. When only two remained, the tension became unbearable. Footsteps echoing where none should be, shadows forming in the blowing snow without shape or origin. It was no longer just the cold or the elevation. It was a presence. The last survivor, his name never publicly released, reached the Firewatch station at the base of Rattlesnake Ridge in the final hours of dusk, barely able to knock. His knuckles bled against the wood. His skin was a latticework of frostburn and torn fabric. His mouth moved before sound emerged. When the ranger on duty opened the door, the man collapsed inside, shaking uncontrollably. His first coherent sentence was about something watching them, tracking their movements, not a hallucination from exposure, but a creature with intent. He described moments where the wind would stop and something would breathe behind them. He recalled the sensation of being followed, not pursued, but observed. Cold eyes he never saw, weight pressing from above. He swore that the storm was not a coincidence, that it came because they were there. He believed the others weren't lost to hypothermia or the terrain, but to something else. Something that moved between trees when no one was looking, that waited for them to weaken before claiming them. He spoke of sounds, cracking limbs, unnatural pacing, the hollow echo of claws on rock. His body was failing, but his fear never waned. Search teams launched within hours. They scoured the path the team was meant to take and followed weak signals from the final GPS pings. Weeks passed. When they found the last known camp, it was in a shallow depression near a frozen stream. Tents lay shredded, claw marks raked across two nearby trees, too high, too wide to be made by anything local. Blood soaked into one corner of snow, now blackened and frozen solid. There were no bodies, no boot prints, no trails leading away. The Idaho Wildlife Authority responded by issuing a no-access order for the entire northeastern region of Clearwater. Surveillance drones were launched over the highest ridges, scanning for heat, movement, anything. Occasionally, a blur would appear, something massive moving between pines, only to vanish before the sensors could lock. No images ever showed the creature directly. Still, drone footage picked up patterns. Displaced snow in shapes too clean for wind, long indentations on ridge slopes, broken branches at impossible heights. The survivor never returned to the mountains. He refused interviews, retreated from public life, and moved out of state under a different name. But rangers who interacted with him noted one thing: he never referred to the bear as it. He always said she, as though the mountain had a singular mind behind it, watching from above, choosing when and how to let people live. To this day, no further expeditions have crossed that stretch of clear water. Maps label it only as restricted due to extreme environmental risk, but those who know the region speak differently. They say the forest still holds them, the vanished ones, and that the snow itself has learned to erase what shouldn't be found. The bear, or whatever she has become, is never seen, only sensed. A presence in the cold, a shadow at the edge of memory, a silence too deep to be natural.